So I decided to start a new series for you guys on my channel. It's called What's for Keto Dinner. Since I know a lot of us are busy, we either have families or just lead busy professional lives, I wanted to come up with just like a weekly spread of kind of like what I eat for dinner, what I feed my family, and how I meal prep it one day a week, and then it just provides usually enough meals for us throughout the whole week. Sometimes I have to substitute with just some quick stuff like steak or chicken or things like that. But I wanted to kind of give you guys ideas of how you could stay keto, feed your family, and eat throughout the week. Usually most of my meal prep is going to be done in under an hour, and then all of these meals only take probably like half hour to prepare on the day of. If that, it's probably like even less than that. So I hope you guys enjoy this new series. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think and if I should create more videos like this. For today's meals, I'm gonna be prepping up 3 recipes. We're gonna start with a creamy pumpkin soup, and then next I'm gonna have an enchilada lasagna casserole, and finally a barbecue cheeseburger meatloaf. The meatloaf and the lasagna casserole we'll have later in the week, and we're gonna eat that pumpkin soup tonight when I make it. Starting off first with the pumpkin soup, I'm gonna add a little spice to it. So I have 1 jalapeno here that I am going to de-seed and then slice up. I'm gonna mince it up into tiny pieces. If you want to use like canned jalapenos, canned diced jalapenos, you could do that as an easy substitute, or maybe even add canned diced chilies, that works too. If you don't like heat, you could just totally omit this. I'm also gonna be using some pre-chopped up onions. That's a little shortcut as well. In a stock pot, I'm adding in some oil, and we're gonna add in a little bit of our diced up onions and saute that along with a little bit of garlic paste. You can use minced garlic here if you want to as well, and then a little bit of ginger. I'm using about a tablespoon of ginger. And then in goes our jalapeno, our minced up jalapeno. We're gonna add that to the pot, give it a good stir to mix it, and you're gonna cook it down until the onions are softened. Up next, we're gonna add in some of our seasoning. So you're gonna need a teaspoon of ground cumin, a teaspoon of smoked paprika, and then a teaspoon of salt. You wanna stir that and let it cook. This helps the flavors develop. Next up, we're gonna add our pumpkin. So I'm using canned pumpkin puree. Make sure you reach for something that says 100% pumpkin puree. Make sure you're not getting the pumpkin pie filling, just because that's gonna add a bunch of sugars and it's gonna taste really weird in this recipe. So definitely make sure that you're getting 100% pumpkin puree. We're gonna add that to our pan, give it a good stir to mix it up, and then we're gonna pour in our chicken broth. So you wanna add around 3 cups of chicken broth, or you can use vegetable stock. If you wanted to make this recipe vegan, like let's say you're on the vegan diet, or you're trying to make something for somebody who's on the vegan keto diet, you can definitely do that. Just make sure you're using vegetable stock. When you're adding in the butter, make sure you're using like a vegan friendly butter instead. So you can definitely do this a vegan style. And I'm gonna be adding in some chicken. So I bought some pre-shredded chicken from the supermarket. It's just a really quick option for me. This is a great recipe if you're coming home from work and stopping at the store and don't really know what to eat. This recipe is delicious. It's perfect this time of year with the fall. I always crave like a creamy pumpkin soup. And adding in the chicken just adds a little bit of protein, because my boys, they don't really like just straight vegetarian meals. Like they gotta have some meat in it. So we're gonna heat that until it comes to a boil, and then I'm gonna cover it and set it aside, and I'm gonna move on to my other recipes. Moving on to our enchilada lasagna, I'm gonna add a little bit of oil onto a skillet, and then I'm gonna add in more of those diced onions. We're gonna give that a good stir and cook it until it's softened. And then I'm gonna add in my ground beef. I like to break up my ground beef into tiny pieces. My husband hates big, thick chunks of ground beef, so I like to mash it up as small and finely ground up as possible by using this nifty little device I got from Pampered Chef. So once most of that beef is brown, then I'm gonna add in my seasoning. I'm putting in a tablespoon of chili powder and a teaspoon of ground cumin, and then a teaspoon of oregano. Oh, and you'll also need some salt. This is about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Stir that together, get those seasonings nice and blended and heat it up just so that their aromas come through. And then I'm gonna add in some salsa. So this is not your traditional enchiladas and not your traditional enchilada sauce. It's just kind of like an easy shortcut. So I have all the flavorings going in there, and then I'm just adding in a little bit of salsa that will help give it that really authentic, like Mexican flavor. And we're gonna stir that until everything is mixed up, and then we're gonna remove it from the heat. Next, I'm gonna add in a little bit of sour cream. This is a half a cup of sour cream just because I want it to be creamy. So it's gonna be more of a creamy enchilada casserole. And now it's time to assemble our enchilada lasagna. So we're gonna spoon a little bit of that beefy enchilada mixture down on the bottom of your casserole dish. And then I realized I forgot to add olives. My recipe calls for olives. So I'm putting in like maybe around like a half of a can into my beef mixture. And then I'll sprinkle a few on top of the layer that I already put down. If you guys want the full recipe for this recipe, I'll have it linked down below in the description box. It's on my website, KetoFocus.com. Now, for my tortillas, instead of using a low-carb tortilla, I'm going to be using sliced deli chicken. This is my little hack that I use all the time when I'm making lasagna or any sort of enchiladas. I use the sliced deli chicken, and the reason why is because it cuts down on carbohydrates, because even if you use low-carb tortillas, you're still going to have some carbohydrates in there. So I'm using the sliced deli chicken. It's just pure protein noodles or tortillas. And then you can see I'm also putting down a layer of sliced cheese. I like the way that this works in this recipe. You could use shredded cheese if you wanted to, but I just like the sliced cheese because I think that it creates like an even layer, and I just like the way when I cut into it and take out a slice of this enchilada lasagna, it's just super cheesy within those layers. So I just have Colby Jack cheese on hand. You could use whatever cheese you have. And then we're gonna repeat our layers too. So I have the ground beef mixture going on there, and then we're gonna add some more chicken and more cheese, and just repeat it until you run out of your ground beef enchilada mixture. I always like to use a smaller casserole dish so I could really get that height of that lasagna effect. So it makes like a thicker piece of lasagna. So my pan is a little bit smaller. It's maybe just a tad bit smaller than an 8x10, but you could use a larger pan too. If you have a 9x13, maybe you're only gonna get like a couple layers down. That's totally fine. And then finally, I like to top it with some additional cheese, but this time I'm gonna be using shredded cheese. This is 1 cup of a Mexican blend shredded cheese going on top. Now, if we were gonna bake this, you would wanna bake it in a 400-degree oven, but I'm not going to. I'm just gonna wrap it up in plastic wrap first. You could freeze this if you wanted to, or just stick it in the fridge to have later on in the week. Either way, like I said, if you do go to bake it, you're gonna bake it around 400 degrees for around 20 minutes or until the cheese is bubbly. If you do bake it from frozen, bake it again at 400 degrees. It's just gonna take longer to bake. And I think for this one, I'm just gonna keep it in my refrigerator because I'm gonna have it probably like 3 or 4 days from now. If it goes longer than that, I'm probably just gonna freeze it. We'll just see how the rest of my week goes. All right, moving on to our meatloaf. Our meatloaf actually starts in a saucepan, so I'm adding a little bit of avocado oil, and then I'm gonna saute some onions. This is like maybe around a half a cup of onions going in here, and a little bit of garlic paste. You could use minced up garlic too if you want for this recipe. I just always love using the garlic paste because it's so much easier. So we're gonna add that to there, and I'm gonna saute it up until the onions and the garlic have softened. And then we're gonna set it aside and assemble our meatloaf. Now, everybody always wants to know what to use as like a breadcrumb substitute for meatloaf, and I use pork panko. So pork panko is just finely ground up pork rinds. So this is the brand that I use. I'll have it linked down below for you guys. I get it from Amazon. I always just keep like a big bag of it, and then I'll put it into like a little container I have in my pantry. You can store it like in the refrigerator if you're worried that it's gonna get spoiled or anything like that, but I keep it in an airtight container and I've never had a problem with it. So that's gonna be our breadcrumbs for the meatloaf. But to make the actual meatloaf, I'm gonna add in some meat. And then this is a barbecue cheeseburger meatloaf, so we need to add some barbecue sauce. So you want to look for a low sugar or keto approved barbecue sauce. And the one that I'm using is by Lily's Q. It's my favorite one. It tastes the best. Primal Kitchen also makes one, so you could get that option there. You could also make your own keto barbecue sauce. I do have a recipe on my website. I'll have it linked down below for you. It's very easy to make. You could actually make it at the same time as you're making this barbecue cheeseburger meatloaf if you wanted to. Then we're gonna add in some eggs. These are my favorite eggs. They're by Happy Egg Company. We only need 2 eggs in this recipe, so we're gonna add those in. I love these eggs just because they're filled with omega-3 since the chickens are free range. They lay the best eggs. Next comes our pork rinds. You'll need 2 cups of ground pork rinds. Now, if you don't eat pork, a substitute that you could use is just use almond flour, or you could add some cheese, like maybe some grated Parmesan cheese. That will work too. The breadcrumbs are usually put in meatloaf because they add moisture. So you just need something that's gonna add some moisture. We're gonna also add in some cheese because of course it's a cheeseburger meatloaf. So I have some Colby Jack cheese going in there and then a little bit of cream. So you could use nut milk or heavy cream, but you'll just need a half of a cup. Then we're gonna add in some parsley. I'll need 2 tablespoons of finely minced up parsley. I'm using my handy little chopper. I'll have it linked down below if you guys are interested in getting one of these. They are awesome for mincing up any sort of herb. I'm also gonna add in 2 teaspoons of oregano and a couple teaspoons of salt. One teaspoon of smoked paprika and 1 teaspoon of black pepper. Now to mix this, you could use your bare hands, but I'm gonna use gloves this time. So we're just gonna use our hands and just mix everything together. One of the tricks to make sure that you have your seasoning right when it comes to meatloaf is after everything's mixed, just pinch off a little chunk and put it in a skillet and cook it all the way through and then taste it. If it tastes perfectly seasoned, then you're fine. If it feels like it needs some more salt, then you go back to your big batch and add a little bit more salt. For my meatloaf pan, I'm using this one I picked up at Williams-Sonoma, but there is one on Amazon that I'll have linked down below for you guys. I like it because it has these perforated holes where all of the grease can drop down into there instead of just soaking in your meatloaf, because I don't really like it when it's like a liquidy meatloaf. So I'm gonna press in all of my meatloaf mixture into the loaf pan. And then once again, I'm not gonna bake this right away, but if I was, you would bake it in a 350-degree oven for around 45-60 minutes. This is also freezer safe, so you could freeze it if you wanted to. You can thaw it out the night before so that it's nice and thawed and it will only take like 45 to 60 minutes to cook, or you can bake it from frozen. Again, you're gonna bake it at 350 degrees, but increase the baking time to around 90 to 120 minutes, just to make sure it's cooked all the way through. My kids love this recipe. They request it all the time. If you have people that really aren't a big fan of meatloaf, this one will definitely change them because it's like a barbecue cheeseburger. I mean, who doesn't love barbecue and cheeseburgers? Now, as I turn to go finish the rest of my soup, I realized that I left out the onions. And the onions are totally important in the meatloaf because it helps make it moist. Like onions in a meatloaf provide moisture so that your meatloaf isn't dry. So instead of like pulling the whole thing out and mixing it in, I just decided to just layer it on top. Normally I'd probably put like another layer of barbecue sauce on top, but I opted for this onion mixture instead. So don't forget your onions. They're totally essential for meatloaf. Like I said, it provides moisture, but also provides some flavor too. Now that meatloaf is all done, that recipe is done. So we have 2 recipes done so far. I'm gonna now finish up my pumpkin soup. So bringing that pot back over, it's been simmering for this entire time since I've been prepping the other recipes. So all those flavors have developed nicely in there. And now I'm just gonna add a few extra ingredients. We're gonna add in some coconut milk. Actually, the recipe calls for coconut cream because you just really want the cream part of the coconut milk. I didn't have that on hand, I only had coconut milk. So just make sure that you're only adding in the cream part to this. Don't add in that liquid because that contains more of the carbohydrates. And we're also gonna add some peanut butter to this recipe. So this will be like a 1/4 cup of peanut butter going in here. Just think like the combination of the seasonings, like the cumin and the pumpkin and the coconut and the peanut butter, it's just so delicious together. If you don't want to use peanut butter, you could probably substitute with an almond butter instead, or you can completely omit this, but I just love the flavor of peanut butter mixed with pumpkin. And then to help bring out that flavor a little bit more, we're gonna brighten it up with some lime juice. This is 2 teaspoons of lime juice going in here. And then to add a little bit more fat, I'm gonna add in 2 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna mix that together. Now, if I didn't add the chicken in here yet, I would probably put in my immersion blender and blend everything up until it's smooth. So I didn't have any chunks of like jalapeno or onion or anything like that. If you love pureed soups, definitely do that. Maybe just add your chicken last instead of adding it when I did. But after we add all those ingredients and they're all incorporated, your soup is ready to eat. This is a huge hit with my family. They all loved it, even my kids, which surprised me. I didn't think that they'd like it at all, but they loved it. And to be super festive, I poured it into these cute little pumpkin soup bowls. I picked these up from Amazon. I'll have them linked down below for you guys. They're so much fun. Actually, this would be really cute on a Thanksgiving table if you decide to serve soup this Thanksgiving. And you can top it with a little bit of sour cream or creme fraiche and some parsley too. Those are our 3 recipes that I prepped up for the week. They'll last us the entire week. The meatloaf is probably gonna be enough for 2 nights, and same with that enchilada lasagna. Pumpkin soup is probably gonna only last 1 night, and probably the other nights I'll just substitute with a little bit extra, like maybe a night of steak or maybe some chicken. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and again, let me know if you like this style of video.